Welcome to the fourth lesson in Unit 2. So again, we are still talking about congruence transformations in this unit. So again, this is Unit 2, covering congruence transformations. And we're a couple lessons away, I think, from talking about triangles and how these congruent transformations lead us to showing triangles congruent. Okay, so the fourth video here, or fourth lesson, is the last of the rigid motions on the coordinate plane, and that is the rotations. So number 4 here, this is rotations on the coordinate plane. So there are typically 3 rotations that we talk about on the coordinate plane. They are going to be multiples of 90 degrees because if you think about a coordinate plane and how it's broken up, it's broken into 4 quadrants, which are separated by 90 degrees. And again, it's because the x and y axes are perpendicular. So let's talk about the first rotation here. So we're going to rotate 90 degrees. So a rotation, or we're going to rotate 90 degrees. Counterclockwise. So again, we typically always go counterclockwise unless otherwise noted about the origin. About the origin. And again, just for this one, remember that the origin is the point 0, 0. Okay? So this is the rotation that we're going to do. Okay? So to demonstrate these, we are going to start with a point in the first quadrant. So here's going to be my coordinate grid here, coordinate plane. I will put a point A right here in the first quadrant with coordinates of x and y. And again, I purposely make it so that x is farther to the right and y is shorter up, right? Okay, so again, we want to see our pre-image x, y, what is going to happen to the coordinates of our image, right, A prime. All right, so let's take a look at what we're going to do. So let's recall what it means to do a rotation. To do a rotation, what we're doing is we're taking this pre-image, right, we're connecting it to the center of rotation, which is our origin. So this is the origin. And we're rotating it 90 degrees counterclockwise. So 90 degrees is a right angle. So this point is going to end up in quadrant 2. And if I extend this other side to make a 90-degree angle, remember that the sides have to be about congruent. This is where A prime is going to end up, right there. This is that right angle, and again, those 2 sides of that angle are congruent. So what is happening to our coordinates for A prime? Well, notice that instead of being out wider and up smaller, as A was, A prime is now out not so far, but it's up more. So what happens is the x and y coordinates switch places. So the y comes first and the x goes second. But because we're now in the second quadrant, your first number must be negative because it's in the first quadrant. Now, we don't think of that as negative, we think of that as opposite. Opposite. But this is what happens when you rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. The coordinates switch, and when you bring that y coordinate to the front, you have to make it the opposite of what it was. So your image, A prime, is going to be opposite of y, x. Opposite. Okay. Next, now, what happens if we do a rotation? So we're going to rotate 180 degrees. 180 counterclockwise about the origin. About the origin. Okay, so again, I'll draw my coordinate plane. Here it is. Again, we'll start with our point in the first quadrant. So here is my point A. It has coordinates of x, y. So again, we're looking to see what happens with our A, x, y. What happens to our pre-image to become our image A prime. All right, so now we're going to go 180 degrees. Now, if you think of a circle, 180 is half of that circle. So technically, it doesn't matter if you go 180 degrees counterclockwise or 180 degrees clockwise. You get in the same position, right? So again, if I connect A to my origin, so here's my origin. So now 180 is going to be a straight line. So now I'm going to take this and just keep extending the line straight the same distance. So these two are the same. This is your 180 degrees. And now here is where A prime is. Now notice with A prime, we are still going out wide farther than we're going down. So this time, the X and Y stay put. But now, in this third quadrant here, and we'll talk about this at the end, but now both of our coordinates are going to change sign. And this is what happens when I go 180 degrees counterclockwise. My X and Y stay put, but they both become opposite. So the rule here is that A becomes A prime at opposite of X, opposite of Y. Okay? And the last rule to think about is our rotation. So rotate. So now we're going 270 degrees counterclockwise about the origin. About the origin. Now, I want you to think of a circle, right? So if a circle is 360 degrees, if you take 360 and subtract 270, you get 90 degrees. So in a circle, and again, I'll just draw a little picture here. Yeah, okay. So in a circle, if I go 270 degrees counterclockwise, so that's going to be 190, 180, 270. If I go 270 counterclockwise, that is exactly the same thing as going 90 clockwise. So I want you to think about 270 counterclockwise or 90 degrees clockwise. So think about both of those in the same regard, right? 270 counterclockwise is the same as going 90 degrees clockwise. Okay, so let's start with our coordinate plane. Again, we'll put A in that same first quadrant spot. Again, trying to make X look longer or X look wider than Y is tall. And now we're going to see what is going to happen to our A when we rotate 270 about the origin. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my origin in. I'm going to connect A to that origin. So this is the origin. Now again, instead of thinking 270 counterclockwise, let's think of 90 clockwise. So again, that means I'm going to go down here into the fourth quadrant. So if you then make a right angle, sides the same, this is where A prime ends up. Now it's in the fourth quadrant. Now, what happens now is, again, the X and Y switch, because now I'm not going out as far, but I'm going down further. So the Y comes first, the X comes second, but now I'm in the fourth quadrant. And in the fourth quadrant, your X is positive, but your Y is negative. The first coordinate is positive, but the second coordinate is negative. And again, here's what's going to happen. Your A is going to become A prime at Y opposite of X. So again, remember that that negative sign means opposite. And again, here are the three rules to try to remember when it comes to rotations about the origin. Now, instead of memorizing those rules, which can become difficult, I'm going to try to give you an idea of how not to memorize. Okay? So, what we're doing here is we're trying to avoid memorization. So, avoiding memorization. Again, I think that a lot of people have a misconception that they think math is all about memorization. I think that's how you spell memorization. Okay? You don't have to memorize. You just have to think it through. So here's our coordinate plane. All right? Now again, I talked a lot about the first, second, third, fourth quadrant, so maybe you don't remember. So the first quadrant is that top right quadrant where X and Y are both positive. The second quadrant, you go counterclockwise, is the top left. Now your X is negative, but your Y is positive. Keep keep going around in the circle. Now we're in the third quadrant, which is the bottom left, where both are negative. And then we go to the fourth quadrant, where the x is positive, but the y is negative. So when you do these rotations, there are two things to think about. So the first thing to think about is, do x and y switch? So when you go 90 degrees, right, which means you're going to rotate one quadrant from where you are. This means that your x and y will switch. So I'm going to put a colon here. So x and y will switch places. Okay, if you go 180 degrees, which is two quadrants, now your x and y do not switch places. So again, I drew an arrow, and then I drew that double arrow, and then threw a slash. They don't switch places, because you switch at 90, and then you switch back at 180. And then third, if you do the 270, which again is also 90 clockwise, but this is three quadrants counterclockwise, quad. So now your x and y do switch. So again, that is the rule. 90 and 270, they switch. 180, they do not switch. Okay? So those are the three options. Okay? And then the last thing to think about, so then your fourth thing to worry about, once you get which one it is now we have to use the appropriate signs. So use appropriate signs. And what I mean by appropriate signs is this picture right here, right? Which quadrant do you end in? That's going to determine the signs of your x-coordinate and your y-coordinate. All right, so in my opinion, rotations are the ones that are the most difficult. Do your best on the assignment, and I'm always there to help you if you need it. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in class.